Thank you, Kevin. And morning, colleagues. I think one of the words utilized from yesterday and today was trust. And trust is very important in the ecosystem, especially when money is involved, because the payment systems actually is where there's a flow of money. And we know that fraud and scams are one of the things that threaten the depletion and the erosion of trust on the national payment system. So that's why our topic today is how we can safeguard against the threat, knowing that fraud and scams are actually even evolving. The tactics utilized by the scams and the criminals and the syndicates out there are changing over time. How do we as an industry ensure that we can actually curb that and ensure that maintains the trust but is on the national payment systems? So we have Kimo. Kimo is from FNA. FNA has played a key role in multiple countries in terms of implementing various methods of curbing fraud. They've got a centralized fraud portal that they've implemented in multiple countries. So he'll share that with us. And then we know Andre plays a key role from Sabric. Sabric is our go-to area in terms of managing fraud within the banking sector in South Africa. And then Megan from FirstRand, working with the Savon PAM. I think for as long as I've known Megan, he's been passionate about fraud and making sure that the industry is resilient and can actually manage fraud and work collaboratively in terms of doing that. So Andre, before we even start, we would like to hear from you. Just share some insights from Sabric in terms of what are the key fraud themes that we are seeing out there? What are the very emanating modus operandis utilized by the criminals? And what are the incidents? I think there's so much happening there. The incidents are going up. There's changes in tactics and all of that. And I think very topical in terms of maybe some of the data from an authorized push payment fraud perspective. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, it is my unfortunate pleasure to bring you all back to earth after a wonderful break session and tea and coffee and chocolates and chats with your friends. So here we have the realities. I'll start with statistics, just a very small snapshot of the digital fraud losses, and then talk briefly about the modus operandi. So if you look at this very first slide, depicts the growth in digital fraud from 2023 until July of this year. When I say digital fraud, we are only looking here at fraud committed through banking apps and then the so-called push payment frauds. That is where bank customers are coached through social engineering and all sorts of other means to actually either do with transactions themselves or to divulge their own banking information to the fraudsters who will then commit the frauds, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So gross losses, 2023, amounted to 1.04 billion in digital frauds. And that is only Sabric members. So we're talking the major banks in this country and a number of others. 1.04 billion. Increased by 74% to 1.82 billion in 2024. And you probably have seen and heard in the media what a noise was made about that. And of course, usually it is what are the banks not doing right and why are the banks allowing this. Incident numbers increased from 42,000 in 2023 by 105% to 87,000 in 2024. That equates to 116 cases per day, 2023, going up to an average of about 240 cases per day in 2024. And despite all the fraud risk management efforts of the banks, all the awareness that we try to create collectively, independently, the stats for 2025 paints a very bleak picture. Year-to-date comparison, January to July 2024, versus January to July of this year, reflect incident numbers of almost 47,000 in 2024, increasing by another 30% to 61,000 in 2025. with case numbers now averaging 289 per day. Gross losses for this comparative period increased by almost 38%, from 966 million to 1.33 billion. Okay, that is an average of 119 million rand per month. Now, I remember years ago when the whole of the industry lost that amount of money in a year on all the fraud types, and we thought it was terrible. So this is what we are now seeing per month. And if I extrapolate that number to the end of this year, we could very well end up with gross fraud losses in this space of 2.28 billion or more, because this is an ever-increasing monthly number, unfortunately. So what is the big thing here? If you just think a couple of years ago, card fraud was the big thing. Everybody lost the money through card fraud. Now, authorized push payment has overtaken it. And as we can see here in the 2024 statistics, really horrible amounts. However, year-to-date losses for this year shows that authorized push payment fraud exceeds card fraud losses by approximately 2.6 times. So the key drivers for that is, of course, the speed at which transactions can happen, real-time payment rails, and the speed with which we can now push money to somebody and that money is available immediately. Okay. Impersonation and remote access coaching that I touched on before. That is the big thing. People are just so easy to convince that they must give their details to somebody else or to do a transaction. And even we sat in the scam room that I will talk to shortly. We sat in this scam room listening to clients on the phone and tried to convince us that this is not fraud that we are trying to stop. So unfortunately, that is the big thing. And then, of course, together with that, mule accounts. Money is dissipated from one account to multiple other accounts in 3-4 different banks within seconds from the time that it was scanned. So, big problem that we have. So, in order to understand what is happening here, the modus operandi around this is all about the pretext and social engineering. Somebody pretending to be from the bank, from some other security area, from a cell phone company, etc., and then telling you there's urgency, there's risk to your account or whatever. And of course, on the other hand, there are those who will convince you that their investment is the best thing ever and that you're going to make lots of money. So it's that whole social engineering, creating trust and getting the information. I think you all know about that. And then, of course, once they have control, the first thing that these guys would do is, if they cannot, they move what they can, or they create, or they add all these mule accounts to your profile, and the money can start flowing. Okay. So that is, I think, in brief, the bleep picture, and the only thing I can say to end off before handing over is we cannot expect to see a different result if we do not do something differently. And I'm going to talk about some of those shortly.
Thank you for that, Andrea. I think definitely it's not looking good, but might get worse unless if we do something collaboratively to solve for that. Now, Kimo, you have done a lot in terms of helping multiple countries, and I'm saying Marcus a lot, maybe from the business cases where you've implemented your solution. Please share with the audience the key insights of the solution that you have and the benefits that have actually been gained from the solution, and even some of the success factors to say, what does it take to actually for the solution to work?
Very good, excellent, thank you. And great to be here in beautiful South Africa again. I think this is my 5th time this year, and so it's going to come in November again, as I'm a very frequent visitor here. So maybe I start from the beginning, how Malaysia was the first one to set up a national automated technology-driven response to fraud and scams. And they started about 3 years ago. They set up a national scam response center, so people could call this their hotline and say they had been scammed. And then they would say back, okay, let's try to get your money back. Instead of saying that, okay, it's your fault, the liability is with you. And they had initially a manual process where the call operators would call banks at a time, like Andre explained, that the monies are moved from one bank to another. So they would call and coordinate, and it took quite a while. And but they saw that there is a legs to this. They could crawl some monies back, freeze monies from the new accounts, and return them back to the victims. And they decided to do a technology solution, and they asked the HEMI system operator, which is half owned by the central bank, and this was housed in the central bank, this National Scam Response, to develop something, a technology-driven solution to automate this, because they saw that the manual system wasn't enough to counter the increasing case numbers that they were getting. So we helped them develop what we call money trails, was automated system that looks from the incident payment immediately, where did it in seconds go to another account, how it gets dispersed. And quite often the criminals then, even somewhere, like in the third or fourth account, they think that it's safe there. Or then they have this trouble getting it out in cash, or moving it abroad, or getting into crypto. So there's this moment of time when you can still find the money in the system and freeze it. And it went live last April. And today, with half a year later, it already had a 25% recovery rates in total, which was up 50 times from what they had before. When they had a bilateral system with the banks, they only had 0.5%. It reduced the effort by the banks. The banks are the users of this. So there are now almost 1,000 case officers from banks by 75%, so that they use 1/4 of the effort, the case officers, to actually solve a case, because they're using this centralized utility provided by the national payment system operator. But those are sort of the, I think, key benefits. And of course, I think then there are lots of benefits that accrue later, because they've reported fraud rate up at scams, because people started to believe that there's some reasons to report this fraud and scam. So quite often people just keep it to themselves, they play themselves. But if they think that, hey, actually I will get my money back, they report it. So they got much more better statistics and understanding what is the actual situation in the country. And this same operating model now is being copied by a lot of countries. So we have conversations in over 60 countries. And the bleak statistics is not unique to South Africa. They are unique to every country. Every country has the same. And from Finland, the scams tripled last year in Finland because of AI-driven scams. And all the criminals can now speak fluent Finnish. It is very good for that English, because they can use large language models. They have their own models, Edu GPTs and others, like fraud GPTs, where they sort of scale up their operations worldwide to international criminal organizations. So it's like, I think you said, like it probably gets much better before it gets worse. So I think the response is a technology response to also on the country side, and working together as a industry, our country, and then also cross-border events. That's next step.
That's great. And what are the supporting legislators that actually has enabled the solution? I hear a lot, and even from the questions we're receiving, it's all about data sharing. And in South Africa, we've got the POPI Act, which actually inhibits data sharing. So you need to do this around this. But I don't want us to limit it to that, to say we implemented it. What legislators that actually enabled the solution, and is data sharing one of those aspects?
In quite a few countries, it's AML legislation that was already passed that allows for data sharing in case of money laundering, and all the newling activity is money laundering. There was a fraud event, and then it was laundered through the banking system. So some countries use that. Other countries have, in the last year, set up special legislation. I think Australia did it, Philippines, Singapore is in the process, US in the process. Other countries, and legislation change this be very small, that I can share as a bank an account number with another bank, and maybe a transaction reference number, so that I know and I can start tracing the funds when they go. It's very little information that is needed. Finland is going through the legislative change now as well. They took 1 year to figure out that this was not possible with the existing legislations, that they're doing legislative change. But that's usually not sufficient. Usually you also need a regulation that specifies a little bit more detail how this data can be used for the purpose of fraud, made by the central bank, by the supervisor, and then you need standard operating procedures. How does everyone work together within the system? So in a way, these 3 layers of enablers for the technology to run smoothly, because speed is of essence here. We want to very speedily trace the funds and then inform all the banks that in parallel, not in sequence, that they go at these accounts, maybe their new accounts, and that sharing information back so that fraud can be prevented, and the monies are not that just kept sending to these mule accounts, but they are already suspected.
Okay, thank you so much. And I know you in Sadric, mule accounts are one of the things that concern us, but not limiting it to that, Andre, there are initiatives. I know you are busy these days. You're a very busy man, and actually the whole Sadric team is busy. There are a lot of initiatives that you've actually started at Comences, South Africa, in terms of killing fraud. Please share some of those insights and what can we expect as an industry, because we are all worried about this. We need to know what's happening. So please share some of those initiatives.
Thank you. Yes. And when we say Sadric, just realize we're a very small company, non-profit company, public benefits organization. We comprise of members of the PACs. So when we say we are doing something, it is always with our member banks and very often using their skills, their resources, etc. Typical example is to follow on from Kimo's discussion. So a number of entities within South Africa, from regulators to private industry, have started working on plans on how to deal a national anti-scam center within this country, similar to what Kimo is talking about. When we looked at this in July, August, as SAVIC, we said, let us pull our members together and start a proof of concept, banking industry anti-scam center, in a very simplistic manner, bringing these investigators and Pay Inc., who sits on the payment rails within the offices of SABRIC, sitting in our boardroom day by day, 20-odd people working scams as they happen or as they have just become aware. We typically look at scams that have occurred within the previous 12 to 24 hours. So that commenced in September, the 1st of September, and the proof of concept was aimed to run only for the month of September, with the half-month check to see whether we find any positive effects, should we carry on or not, and then a final report at the end of September. The idea was to close this down at the end of September. Well, I can say that we had overwhelming support for this thing from our members and Pay Inc., who actually sat Pay Inc., and I must mention that sits there with their laptops looking real-time at transaction, and as banks work with each other, as the money flows or have flowed, they can say, you can see it's moving now to an account at that bank, this is your account number, look at it, see where, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how we started working this thing, all within the parameters of Papaya and other limiting. Now, I don't want to say limiting because it's there for very good reason, but within our data requirements. And that is why the SABIC legal experts are part of this whole process as well, to make sure we don't fall foul of it. And the whole idea behind this anti-scam center is to preserve funds. It's not yet the repatriation and full investigation afterwards. It's preserve first, investigate afterwards. So it's really a coordinating hub, getting the guys together in a face-to-face environment. This ran for the month of September, as I said. We came to the end of the month. Our half-month check said better go on this. It's very successful. So at the end of September, we can show that we had managed about 570 live scam incidents. If I say live, these things are, they've just occurred, the money is somewhere in the process, etc. The time to preserve money reduced from more than 24 hours on average in the past on those cases to minutes in some cases, literally stopping it. Because what we have seen is within minutes, the money moves out of the system, goes from bank to bank to bank to bank, ends up in wallets, either crypto or internet gambling wallets, or in other ways out of it, out of the system. Very difficult to preserve. We had a 36% fund preservation rate on those cases, which is up from a typical of 12 to about 22, 23% in the normal way of banks, out of their statistics. Okay. So in one case, the very first case that we handled, we actually preserved 90% of the lost money. And that was by one of my staff members phoning the CEO of a cryptocurrency and say, the money has just landed in your accounts, please have it stopped immediately. Okay, that's how active this was. Okay, so what worked in this whole process? Co-location. Fantastic. But we can't continue with that. So right now they're running a hybrid process further on where it's co-located 1 day a week. At the other 4 days of the week, the guys are working remotely. And of course, there are some after hours work also done. Development of standard operating procedures and common language. Amazing when you put 13 banks in a room, how different the language is. What are we looking at? And then, of course, that there's a massive reduction in the time that the banks then have to take afterwards for the investigation because they've got all the facts already here, almost in a file already. Challenges in this whole process, resource constraints. Clearly, there are lots of people involved in this process, and also people change all the time, so there's coverage variability. Data share considerations, I don't want to talk about that too much, but yeah, there are legal guardrails that we must follow. And then, of course, this is manual, very, very manual. We need the tools, the stuff that Kimo is talking about. We didn't want to put it into our process as yet because the banks pay for everything that we implement the Fabric. We are funded only by banks. They're not pay sponsorships, etc. So that is a real issue. So hopefully that will improve or get switched on once we get international anti-scam sector at the end of the day. And I need to, define us of this part. I think on a whole, what stops us from doing this thing big right now? Funding and staffing. It's going to cost money to put in tools. We need more staff. And in some banks, they have now committed that they are gearing up their whole team sitting behind it in the offices because they saw the value of this. And we are getting others to follow suit. The legal basis, if we expand it across other industries in the National Anti-Scam Center where we want to plug in at the end of the day as a banking industry, there are, of course, further legal impediments that needs to be covered and what operating models will be followed and how Google own the National Anti-Scam Center, all those things. So in conclusion, this was an incredibly valuable proof of concept that's now running in a virtual environment. We are currently doing project planning on how to expand this for the rest of this year until at such a time when we can plug into a National Anti-Scam Center as and when that's up. And I think that's really enough said about our anti-scam center. Other initiatives, I can very briefly and not to waste a lot of time. We are busy working with the Joint Initiative on Crime and Corruption Presidency project on a number of initiatives. For instance, Section 205 digitization and assisting DPRC and others. It's all about the lawful execution of Section 205s, etc. We are doing scanning of devices, phones, iPads, etc., in our Digital Forensic Analysis Center, doing that for our banks, but also where they can't do it or need extra assistance because many banks are things like this going as well. But we're also assisting the PCI with that and training them on how to use it. And there are a number of other initiatives currently. On the international front, we had just agreed with Interpol and access to certain data that we need to help banks with their vehicle asset finance issues, cross-border and application fraud stuff, and a few others that's on the board. And then, of course, awareness. That's the big thing. We have agreed, or we are more and more seeing that it does not help for each bank to individually put up all their awareness. Be careful of the scalums will try to get you to give your details. It's just not working. So we are talking as an industry, but also across industries. How can we improve that and maybe collaborate better in creating that awareness to our public? Because that's where the losses are sitting. They are losing the money.
But thank you for that, Andre. And maybe as we are running out of time, and we also want to take a couple of questions from the audience. Megan, on your side, I think we've seen over the years an increase in the authorized push payments fraud versus the normal fraud. And I think a lot of this is driven by scams and all of that. What do you think, or why would you say this APP fraud is increasing? And what would good look like if we were to protect our users of payment systems out there and curb this? What would that look like for you?
Thank you, Nikki. I think if you consider the life cycle of a fraud, it's that point about our lives are becoming very digital. And that's where we're getting exposed to criminals interacting with us from anywhere in the world and tricking us into things. So we're shopping online, we banking online, we socializing online. And all of those create this sort of better threat landscape for people to interact with us and trick us into making payments. So that's one of the environments into which we've launched faster payments. I think the other thing is if you compare faster payments to other payments rails, the other payments rails being more mature have got very mature risk capabilities. They have vetting of merchants and users on debit order rails. They have chargeback rights for payers in the event of fraud. Ultimately, the parties who bank the receivers of these payments are liable for these transactions in the event of a fraud. So we have to consider that in taking away the one control we had on EFTs, which was delayed settlement of the recipient, we've taken that out. What do we replace it with? So that there lies part of the answer. We're going to have to put in mitigated controls to prevent this sort of open season on faster payments. I want to double pick on one of Andrea's points. Faster payments or push payment fraud has now overtaken card fraud by value of losses. But the difference is that on card fraud, it reverses back to the merchants and the merchants back. These frauds are being borne by customers. So the context is that international syndicates are reaching our customers and committing frauds on them. But it's happening at a global level, but it's a very personal consequence, a personal loss. So we have to look at those billions of rands of losses in that context, which is important. This is the reason why there's now a massive urgency around how we deploy the controls that we need to put into it. So from the work I'm doing, we're basically orientating around the SARB wants to make digital payments available to everyone in this country, but coming to a point of trust. So people have to trust not only the payments, but they have to trust where they're storing their funds. So it does have an implication actually for digital banking and digital stores of value as well. So it's got a very, very broad implication. So that's how we're thinking about it. There's a huge opportunity before us in terms of how we modernize the payment system and the creation of a national payments utility that Reed and others have spoken about it for 2 days, to also potentially put in a national fraud risk management utility. So that's really scaling up and creating a platform for the types of work that Sabric has provided for us, the platforms that PayEC has provided for us, and potentially consolidating some of that effort into one big platform. And the War Room is actually a brilliant example and sort of evidencing what we already knew. It's evidencing and giving us hard facts around how these frauds are taking place, the accounts they're being received into, how quickly they laundered, and ultimately how the funds get off-boarded from the system, out of bank accounts into environments like cash vouchers, cryptocurrencies, and so on. That allows us to take that evidence and say, what are the most meaningful things we can do right now and in the coming weeks and months to start to frustrate the level of fraud, even as we gear up the platform that can be more agile and respond, because the guys will work around us. The minute we start chasing the funds quicker, they're going to take notes and start moving it differently, and we'll have to be able to respond to that. So that's why we've got to do tactical interventions as we also start to build a platform that can respond rapidly as criminals work around our controls. And obviously mindful of watching what other countries are doing, because it's the same syndicates perpetuating things at different markets. We can learn, and the collaboration actually at an international level becomes really important. So we can quickly learn and figure out how to start trying to get in front of these.
Definitely, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm just looking at some of the questions here, and one of them, Andre, speaks to what you spoke about, financial literacy. I think the awareness part is a bit of that. So how do we even stop fraud before it happens? So versus identifying the fraud, detecting it, and then trying to stop, then Kimo, to your point, then is moved from multiple million accounts into crypto, and by then it's too late. How can we actually try and stop it before it even gets to that? Do you think there's more that we are doing, Megan? Are we doing enough? And maybe, Andrew, on your side, what can you do? And the Kimo, how can we learn from what you've done over in all these countries that you've worked with? Megan, you can start.
When you look at the number of nature of the frauds, it's staggering. Everyone in this room could be con tomorrow to one of these things. That's how live now. So I think it's not really just about financial literacy or digital literacy. It's almost about two things. One is people need to understand there's bad people out there, and to be more circumspect. When you're interacting online or people phone you out of the blue, you almost have to start becoming a bit more circumspect. So how do you sort of educate people around that? That's the first thing. And the second thing is, how do we, in a world where digital interactions are changing all the time, even how we bank digitally is changing all the time, how do we create some consistency to say to people, this is not normal. This is normal. Don't trust this, because there's a lot of don't click on a link, but sometimes you do click on a link, and I don't know it's hard to keep pace with what's normal and what's normal, what is suspicious, what isn't, because at the other end we're saying our payments are seamless. We must not even know we made a payment, but sometimes we must know we made a payment. It's that kind of complexity you're dealing with. I like the idea of the UK's campaign that just says, stop, think, ask questions. Because that's probably the single most impactful thing you can do. It's just, there's no reason you have to rush. Someone phoned you, says, urgently, give us your one-top. But just, is the most powerful message you could say, pause, think, reflect, phone a friend. That's probably the most powerful thing you could do. Just thought.
Definitely. Andrew, just a very high level.
Very high level. Well, we could go back to the days of chicks with a 7-day caring period for help. But being very serious, the problem that banks face, of course, is that they do not know this is fraud until it has occurred. And the unusual activity or suspicious transactions raises alerts, and they start asking questions. All of the client realizes they've been defrauded, they've been scammed, and they phone E. It takes time to do that. So your problem that you have is education is probably the biggest issue right now. So there are 3 points, very briefly. Improved real-time data sharing and AI-powered scoring services. That is, in my view, something that we entirely need. Secondly, joint response protocols. As we've seen now with the anti-scam center, more and more of that should happen because these fraudsters work together. It's organized crime. There's a reason why it's called organized. They're not doing it on their own. Third one is broad education campaigns that help empower customers. So it is aimed at specific groups, aimed at specific, the people in the retirement village where I live, they must get a different message than the student who sells his details to a fraudster will use his details to open an account for a meal account. So we need to look at that broad empowerment and training to our consumers.
Thank you. And then maybe, Kimo, before you even touch more, I'm seeing a couple of questions which are linked, but they all even speak about the involvement of non-banks. So maybe from what you've done, have included the non-banks. I think there might be a view out there that sub-rig is only for the banks, but we know that curbing fraud requires more, and Andre mentioned the whole collaboration that's required. In terms of involving the non-banks, what have you seen in Malaysia and all the other countries? And also the lessons learned. I think as you encounter the journey, I'm sure when you move from one country to the next, there were so many areas of improvement that you identified. What do you think, very succinctly, those key items that we can learn from, and even the involvement, broadening this to involve more than just the banks?
Yes, in Malaysia, it's actually the banks, but also digital wallets, fintechs. They include in the crypto exchanges this year, exactly to do that, but automatically, instead of having to call the CEO, that the crypto exchange gets the message that, hey, this was related to a fraudulent chain. The same idea can actually be also expanded cross-border. So we are writing a paper with UNA, which is the Arabic finance system, how they can be the exchange of information and being able to trace cross-border like flows of fraudulent funds. I think so everyone needs to be on it. I think that's every rail used to be on it. In Malaysia, it's 18 different rates. It's QR payments, direct debit, ACH payments, exit payments. Even payments made on the wallets of the municipal transport authority are there. There's 80 different grades that put into information into it. It's also the on-us payments of the banks. So pretty much any way that you can transfer money is included. And I think that's sort of the main lesson. A lot of countries start to think about this sort of different things that they could be doing to counter fraud. But I think going after the money is the single most effective one, because the criminals will then get less money. They have less resources to pre-invest into this business. They need to go to some other country where it's easier. And I think that was what Andy White said yesterday, that they try to make Australia this country that criminals choose to go somewhere else. But of course, like when every country proves their defenses, then there's eventually no country to go to. Because in the past, the response has been to go after the criminal. You report the police, and then the police goes after the criminal. But you want them to go after the money, right? If you get scammed, I want you to go after the money and I want my money back. Criminal, yeah, okay, you can also do that, but please go after the money. And I think that creates confidence a little more in the system. If you just have education and scare people become very scared and then start to disengage. My mother, for example, a lot of her friends have been scammed, so she doesn't do any online commerce anymore. The same way I don't reply to phone calls because they're probably scammed. So these systems, the usage goes down if people don't trust them anymore. So there's a fine balance between the education and not going overboard and making everyone afraid and excluding them from the economy.
Thank you for that. I'm seeing a couple of questions around the customer being at fault, and I don't think that notion might have shifted over time in terms of when you report fraud, it's your fault. What did you do wrong? Especially with the scams. Megan, what are your final thoughts? Especially for customers out there who think, when I approach my bank, are they even going to listen to me, or do they think I fell prey to a romance scam because I'm silly, I'm not aware of these things? What are those key thoughts to say, even on the taking care of your customer side? What is it that we need to do more so that customers don't think that we want to blame them for the fraud that they've suffered?
So I think a couple of things we can do systemically. One is there's quite an urgent need for us to be able to power customers to know who they pay, who's the account holder of their recipient. That deals with some of the fraud types. So I think the industry will look to mobilize how quickly you can make that kind of functionality available. Because right now when you pay, it just says we don't check the name you've loaded, we just check the account number. So that's part of it. I think the other part is when you report a fraud, it's not a great experience because the bank then, the first thing the bank's going to do is ask you to go to the police station, file an affidavit. You're really in an emotional state, and what you're trying to understand is what is the bank doing to try and support you and to follow the money. And so this process that kicks in, and that's not standardized. That speaks to the operating procedures. So to say, we are on your case, we've logged it with this national fraud thing, we're pursuing the funds, here's your case number with the bank, this is who you can contact to get feedback and so on. So, we need to standardize that process so people know that was happening. It may be that the affidavit still needs to happen, but we worry that in having to present yourself at a police station, that is an obstacle for people as well. It's another emotional step to have to go through, especially if you don't trust that you can get any money back. Then it's part of the underreporting problem. So we do also need to navigate, some of those frictions that are in place. And then lastly, the pace at which we can freeze funds and then repatriate back to you. We're doing work on understanding those processes. With a card, it's a click of a button on your app. They say it's 7 days to get your money back. You don't even talk to someone, it just happens. We need to get to that level of process where there's visibility, transparency of process, and refund of the customer as quickly as possible. Because there's nothing like getting the money back in your bank account to know that you sorted. So I think there's a lot of frictions, but we need to solve for some of those workflows across the industry to take some of those frictions out.
Thank you so much. We have run out of time, but thank you so much for indulging us and sharing your insights. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.